Hello again. Several meetings already, we discussed about autoimmune diseases and every dimensions. And probably today is covering the biggest of all topics. And unfortunately, I need to squeeze it all in one meeting because I will be leaving. So today we will discuss the microbiome, which are the set of bacteria which are living inside our body. And I will try to cover as much as possible, but in many cases I will refer to the handout material which you can receive on keys2autoimmune.com. You just write it all together, keys2autoimmune.com, and from there you can receive the handout with many illustrations and bullet lists, which sometimes I will just point to them. You know that our bodies have roughly, approximately like 37 trillion cells in our body. Interestingly, the number of bacteria in our body is more than 33 trillion. So we have more bacteria in our body than our own bacteria. If we talk about genes, the difference is even more impressive. Probably in your body, of all genes, which are variations of genes which are in your body, your own is just 1%. 99% of your genetics is not yours. It's the genetics of your bacteria. If we think about that, and if we think that the bacteria which live inside our body can be changed through lifestyle, it means that you can change to some extent your genetics. At least you can change the genetics of your microbiome, if not your own. Definitely that does change the health condition, or it can bring you to disease, depending on which direction the change goes. The amount of bacteria in our body is not even along all parts of our body. And of course, the most of bacteria dwell in our intestine. The second by significance microbiome is in our mouth. And in one of our meetings, we were speaking about the inflammation processes, how important is the hygiene of the mouth, everything related to that. But in our digestive system, the distribution of bacteria is not even at all. The minimum is in stomach. Then in small intestine, in the beginning, it's very little also. You can see it in handout, there's some illustration to it. And then it gradually increases. And in the distal part of intestine and in colon is the highest amount of bacteria by quantity and by diversity. The reason for that is the stomach acid, which neutralizes and kills almost all bacteria in your food. And it is very important for maintaining the healthy microbiome in your body. We usually tell that we just a couple of decades probably ago, we discovered a new organ in our organism. That is an organ of our microbiome. And it has multiple functions, as usually our organs in our body have multiple functions. And let me touch several of them. One, for example, it is to prevent you from poisonings and infections of different kinds. How it works? The point is that every ecosystem is somehow resistant to strangers. When the bacteria which live inside your intestine, when you introduce other kind of bacteria, for example, you ate something which is contaminated, you drank some water which is contaminated, those strangers come and they need to face the aberrants, those bacteria which are already inside you. And if you have a strong microbiome, the strangers will be quickly removed. They will be made normal. So, because the bacterium is very xenophobic, you can think about it as a city or country of pretty xenophobic people. The strangers which come, they cannot settle. They will be killed. They will be removed. They cannot survive in that city, in that place. The same is your microbiome, especially if it is healthy microbiome. As a result, there are some people you probably observe who can eat non-clean food, who can drink from rivers or lakes with some contaminated water. Especially it is observed with hunter-gatherers or people who live in wilderness, and they don't get sick at all. While you, if you drink from the same pond, you'll get sick definitely. Why? Because they have very strong microbiome which protects them from intruders. Your microbiome probably is not that strong. That is a very important function of microbiome, protecting us of infections of different kinds, mostly infections coming through food and drink, but through other ways also. Another important function, and we are touching, of microbiome is feeding epithelium of your intestine. We know that the epithelium of our intestine mostly takes the energy from short-circuit fatty acids. And the SCFA, that's how it's named, and these short-circuit fatty acids, the different kinds of molecules, are mostly synthesized by your bacteria, which digests or partially digests the fiber which you eat. So, if the microbiome is lacking or abnormal, that source of energy for your epithelium is not produced in adequate quantity, and as a result, you may eat, but epithelium of your intestine is starving without enough energy. And if it is starving, definitely doesn't work well. It does not work well in protecting your body from everything which comes inside your intestine. It doesn't work well with absorption also. Often people notice the bad absorption process even before compromised immune system. People notice the so-called malabsorption through, for example, anemia. It's so prevalent. And why does it happen that different people can eat in the same family probably the same food, but one person has enough iron in the blood and enough of hemoglobin, another person has not enough? Why? They eat the same. It's not being absorbed properly. It may be not absorbed properly because the epithelium is not healthy in intestine. And the health of epithelium, as we just discussed, is related to the health of microbiome. Unhealthy epithelium leads also to leaky gut conditions, which we discussed previously. It can lead to ulcers and other things, or chronic inflammation inside intestine. Another thing is that we discussed last time, I believe, about motility of intestine and importance of active motility of intestine. Now, there were experiments with rats where rats were bred with in certain conditions so that they will have sterile intestine. The gut have no bacteria at all. Those rats suffered from paralyzed intestine. Intestine did not move. No peristaltics, no motility. When they introduce the bacteria, the normal for rats bacteria, into their intestine, the motility would restore. And they discovered that those bacteria produce certain polysaccharides and monosaccharide molecules which can act as they react with the receptors inside the intestine and they stimulate the motility. So normal microbiome is necessary for optimal motility of intestine. And if it doesn't work properly, there will be constipations, there will be diarrhea. We discussed last time that diarrhea does happen in lazy gut conditions. So other thing is that bacteria inside our intestine actually produces many nutrients necessary for our body as a whole. For example, half of all vitamin K, which is necessary for function of our body, half of all vitamin K is produced by our bacteria. Only other half is eaten through food. Only bacteria have enzymes which can produce vitamin B12. Neither animals nor plants can produce B12 vitamin, only bacteria. It is normally made in soil by bacteria which lives in soil. It's also done by certain bacteria living in our colon. And there are several amino acids, including some essential amino acids, are produced by microbiome. What does happen if the microbiome is compromised, not normal? Again, hypervitaminosis, not enough of certain nutrients, anemia, etc. And another function, the last not least definitely, is the formation of healthy immunity. Our immune cells, and we discussed that 70% of our immune cells are in intestine, and their condition and their function is defined by the bacteria with which they are in continuous contact. You change bacteria, you change the immune system. Those two parts work together. So the healthy microbiome is extremely important. And fortunately for us, it can be changed. Unfortunately, it can be changed in both ways. The wrong lifestyle changes it in bad direction. Correct lifestyle, you can fix it back. So, microbiome inertia, which we just talked about, is an important thing, and it helps you if you have a healthy microbiome, because it's not very easy to break healthy microbiome. If you have a healthy microbiome, even if you eat something wrong, most probably you will be okay. Even if you get some small poisoning, you will probably have several hours or one day diarrhea, then you are back to norm again, because its healthy microbiome is stable. Unhealthy one, well, here the microbiome inertia, do you remember we talked about the xenophobic? It's xenophobic city, like those who live here, they do not welcome the strangers. If you have a bad microbiome, the wrong type of bacteria, the wrong composition, it will be not easy to change it to good, because they will not welcome strangers also. So it's always hard work through the inertia of microbiome to change it. You either work hard to break it, or then you work hard to fix it back to norm. That's why, by the way, autoimmune diseases sometimes they happen through food poisoning. I had some people, some patients whom I consulted, who had brucellosis, which is quite common disease in Mediterranean and Middle East, and brucellosis is coming from infections through dairy products, and they were completely healthy. Then they get brucellosis through poisoning by contaminated milk or milk produce, and after that they got autoimmune disease. Why? The xenophobic city was invaded by lots of strangers, because this was massive. So that inertia can be overridden by quantity, but big amount of intruders, and it breaks. And it breaks. When it breaks, the new population which regrows after it is pathological. It's not normal, and it leads to broken immune systems. That's why autoimmune diseases quite often happen after certain kinds of infection. It is interesting that in modern populations, the microbiome composition changed a lot. And you can see some results of research which was done comparing microbiome of modern Western people with microbiome of hunter-gatherers. In your handout, again, on keys to autoimmune.com, if you go, you can receive it. You can see some diagrams which show when they were comparing microbiome of Italian people to microbiome of Hadza hunter-gatherer people in Africa. And you see that those hunter-gatherers in Africa has much more variety comparing to Italian. But even more dangerous looks another diagram which shows comparison of American people to another, it was another research, comparing American people microbiome diversity to the diversity of several different tribes in South America, also hunter-gatherers. And you see that those tribes in South America, they have a spectrum of everything. It looks like a rainbow. Different colors are different groups of microorganisms. And American, it's almost everything is one type. There's almost no diversity. So what happens is because of our lifestyle and because of what we eat, we literally, if we compare the ecosystem inside intestine to the ecosystem on land, like plants or animals, normal is a forest. But we turn it, Western lifestyle turns it to farmland with monoculture. You know, when you go to forests, there are dozens and hundreds of different types of plants around you. When you go to farmland, it's pumpkin, 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 pumpkin. It's everything the same, it's monoculture. And everybody knows, in agriculture it's very well known, that the monoculture concept makes it very vulnerable, very fragile, very prone to diseases. If disease strikes, it destroys everything. It requires lots of care, lots of chemicals, etc. to keep it healthy. Forest, it's stable. It's stable to diseases, it doesn't spread easily, etc. So that's what we see, the difference between healthy microbiome and microbiome of modern Western people, which is not healthy at all. And it is connected to several different factors. And now we will touch those different factors. But very first, which I will tell, and it's very obvious, is diversity of our food. There are 30,000 at least edible plants on Earth. Modern people eat less than 150. Out of 30,000. Never in the world history that was the case. The analysis of archaeological artifacts shows that in ancient time, people did eat 3,000 to 4,000. In Middle Ages, people did eat from 400 to 700. And now it is less than 150,000, again, for all world, but if you take a Western world, it's even less diversity, just several dozen kinds of plants. 75%, and again, you see that the infographics in your handout, 75% of world's food comes from 12 plants and 5 animals.
Sugar being number one.
Yeah, like with that diversity of food, you cannot have good diversity of microbiome, definitely, because yeah, you create a monoculture through feeding monoculture with very low diversity. It is a problem of our industrialized agriculture. According to the research of UN actually has a certain department dedicated to that. America, specifically about America, since 1900 to this day, lost 90% of all kinds of vegetables. Diversity. We kind of focused on several which are gives the best amount, the better for business, yes, and which is easier to do and gives you a big harvest, and we rejected 90% of that diversity, focused on the several. That's definitely there is some result of our health. Still, there is something in our hands of trying to consume more of diverse types of food. Besides diversity of food, there are many other, and you see in our handout how we disrupt our microbiome. One of biggest problems in modern world is antibiotics. And antibiotics you don't consume only when it is prescribed to you by your doctors. By the way, doctors, especially in America, they try to use antibiotics only when other things do not work. It's kind of, there is some sense to use it, but unfortunately you consume antibiotics almost every time when you eat meat. There was an interesting study in America, I forgot when it was, like 10 or 15 years ago, but the point is that the study revealed that people who consume meat, they have less longevity and more of chronic diseases than those people who do not consume meat. But interesting it is that in Europe there was a same study about meat consumption and death, premature death and chronic diseases. In America, they found the connection. In Europe, they didn't find connection at all. They proved actually through study of millions of people across several countries that consumption of meat does not bring premature death, but doesn't make it happen early, doesn't bring more chronic diseases. And then wait a moment, like the same study in two sides of Atlantic, how can it lead to completely opposite results? Then they started to check it. The point is that in Europe, they do not send so much antibiotics to farms, and like cattle is not fed with antibiotics. In America, nowadays, 70% of all produced antibiotics goes to farms. Wow. It's fed to chicken, cows, etc., which you eat after that. In Europe, it doesn't happen. Is it interesting that right now I was taking the information, yes, and it was 70%, because 15 years ago I was preparing similar seminar and it was 50%. Wow. And now it is 70%. What happens? We feed more antibiotics to our food. Most of those antibiotics stay in meat. So if you want to fix, you need either not to eat meat or be very specific of picking antibiotic free. Yes, it's more expensive, probably you will not eat that much, but antibiotics is a bomb exploding inside your intestine. And in every explosion, those who survive are those who are more aggressive. Less aggressive, more complicated, more friendly, usually do not survive that easily. That is the problem with antibiotics. Another danger to microbiome is chlorine in water. In the modern world, in order to prevent infections, all water, potable water in our tap water is chlorinated. How it's correct to tell in English, I apologize. But the problem is that, it does kill bacteria, but the devices which clean that water from chlorine in the public water system are not 100% efficient. So water coming in your tap, sometimes you can even smell it. And this chlorine does affect definitely the bacteria inside your intestine. Again, those who survive better are the most aggressive, as usual. So it makes sense. Water is very important, right? It makes sense to invest into good water filter, which will remove chlorine as much as possible. Well, ideally, it's 100%. I understand that 100% not always achievable, but as better as possible. Investing in that good filter will help definitely. Another problem is different food ingredients, and we will touch that in a moment. But before that, I want to tell about what I mentioned in the very beginning regarding the protection, the guard of our microbiome being the acid produced by our stomach. Our stomach juice is very active chemically, and it contains good amount of hydrochloric acid. A substance which will kill definitely almost all bacteria which come inside. Now the problem is that many people from 22 to 50%, according to different researchers, from 22 to 50% suffer from hypochlorhydria, which means the amount of acid produced in stomach is lower than needed. Now we'll touch why it happens and what to do about it. But before that, I want to tell that even people who have it normal, and also of course people who don't have it normal, sometimes make things even worse. Eating and drinking simultaneously. That's a very simple thing which you can change in your habits. Because what happens when you drink water together with food or right after food? You dilute your stomach juices. You intervene with the normal digestive process, and we talked about it when we talked previously about other factors of autoimmune diseases, but also diluting that acid makes it less efficient in neutralizing, killing bacteria. What is the next step? The bacteria which must be killed is not killed. It enters into small intestine, and do you remember we told that in the very beginning stomach and first portion of intestine should have very little amount of bacteria. But if it is not killed well by stomach juice, there will be many bacteria in intestine. Here you have a problem which is known as SIBO, small intestine bacterial overgrowth. Too much bacteria in small intestine, it definitely does affect what is down the road in big intestine, in colon, and all bacterial system of intestine is changed. So water should be drinking before food or well after the meal, but not during the meal and not right after it. That is a very simple thing which can be changed. And other factors which actually reduce hydrochloric acid in our bodies, and by the way, reduced amount of hydrochloric acid in our stomach juice is factor of risk of stomach cancer. Yeah, it is very well known thing. Hypoacidic gastritis. This is gastritis, inflammation of stomach, because it almost always leads to some amount of inflammation inside stomach, and if it is hypoacidic, it leads to much more frequently leads to cancer. So it's one of risk factors. Aging almost always leads to that. So one factor of risk is aging, but we cannot do anything about it. So let us see what we can do something with other factors besides aging. Okay, high sugar diet. Yeah, we can do something about it, yes. High sugar diet is bad. Poor protein intake. So yeah, getting more protein does stimulate production of acid. Low zinc status and low deficiency on B1 vitamin and some other B group vitamins. Okay, we understand some additions to our what we take, some vitamins and micronutrients. Importantly, zinc over here. Stress. Okay, how much we can do here? It depends. but stress is another risk factor. Eating on the run, because it's connected to not good chewing. The chewing process, that activity of chewing muscles, is through nerve system stimulating the production of gastric juice. So not chewing well, which happens often in the modern rush hour world, yeah, it is also a factor of risk. Many antacid medication, many of them are over the counter, and people are taking it every time when they have some problems. So antacid medication, proton pump inhibitors, H2 blockers, etc. That's also a factor of risk, definitely, because that is how they work. They reduce acidity. Should be avoided at all costs. We should look into root of the problem, not covering, not sweeping dust under the carpet, right? Yeah, and another is the bacterial Helicobacter pylori. It's actually two-way world, because on the one side, lower acidity leads to more bacterial overgrowth, as we thought, and on the other side, that bacterial overgrowth leads to lower acidity. It's a vicious circle, which should be broken. Okay, stomach juice production can be increased by several mechanisms. Several additions to your food. Besides chewing, we told you chewing is important, yes? Aloe vera does stimulate production. Several other plants, gentian, some other herbs like the thyme, the peppermint. In general, try to add more of different herbs and spices into food. It does stimulate the stomach production. Actually, there is a theory, which I believe is true, that one of the reasons why Indian food is traditional and Thai food is so hot, because they live in an environment when there are lots of infection and bacteria. So water is always contaminated. So they needed production of more acid in order to neutralize the infection coming through their food. That's why they were adding more and more of hot spices to stimulate more acid to survive, because otherwise that food may kill you. Dysentery, cholera, all those diseases are coming from India and surrounding areas. Well, so herbs, etc. Hops, interestingly, those which are in beer, the beer I will touch later. Actually, very bad factor about beer, because it brings yeast inside your intestine, and yeast is one of factors which should be avoided. Dandelion and ginger. Ginger is quite common nowadays already in the Western world. Dandelion probably not so much, but it's also very well known to stimulate production. At least you can add some vinegar or lemon or lime juice into your food. Salads, for example, are very good with it. You can add to some other food. So you can increase the acidity. If you know that you have lower acidity in your stomach, you can increase the acidity of your plate contents by some juices or vinegar. And peppermint, I already mentioned, I believe. Pickles of different kind. Almost all pickles do stimulate production of acid. Okay, we talked about antibiotics and chlorine in water, but there's so many other chemical additives in our food. If you eat processed food, you almost always eat that thing. Several years ago, there was a big thing which most of the public did not notice, but in scientific community it was well known, about trehalose. Trehalose is a kind of carbohydrate which is produced in massive production and which was added to almost every kind of processed food. It improved the taste, it improves the texture. Like processed food, if you think about, will taste like junk, because it is junk, it will taste like junk. So in order to make it taste good, like whole chemical laboratories work to synthesize some new thing to improve the taste of processed food. So trehalose was one of those things, and they found that trehalose in food is directly connected to bacteria named Clostridium difficile, and bacteria Clostridium difficile actually in our intestine does cause ulcers. It is directly connected to ulcerative colitis, Crohn disease, etc. So they found the connection. And there was like in scientific community, like we should stop this because trehalose actually leads to ulcerative colitis. But there's too much money about this. It is necessary. So the compromise to which the industry went, they lowered the amount of it. They didn't remove it completely. It's still there, just in lower quantity. Okay, this is one story. How many of those stories with others, which I don't tell you, how many stories which will probably be in the future, which, yeah, just not known. I have personally a rule which I suggest to everybody to have. I do not eat what didn't exist 1,000 years ago.
That's a good.
Importantly, I don't eat what was invented in the era of marketing. Like 150 years, last 150, yeah, I don't eat the thing. Like if my great-great-grandfather wasn't able to eat that, I do not eat that also, because most probably all those things, most probably it is bad for my organism. We don't have time to touch many other things, heavy metals, etc. Again, some of those things will be in the handout. Regarding alcohol, I was promised that I will tell about this. I know that for Adventists is not a problem, but you will talk to other people, and probably you may want one more reason of not to drink. Almost all alcohols, except for several, like vodka, for example, like almost all alcohols, they contain some amount of yeast. Beer is very rich, there's lots of yeast in it. Wines also usually contain lots of yeast. And yeast is one of the agents which coming into your intestine, yeah, it does multiply, it does exterminate other bacteria. So fungal overgrowth, because yeast is fungus, fungal overgrowth inside intestine is one of big problems also connected to infectious diseases of intestine, connecting to immune system diseases, etc. So one more reason of not doing it, but even without yeast, even if it's filtered, even if it is just vodka, yeah, even then, there was plenty of research to find that just alcohol by itself, ethyl alcohol, it does act the same as many other like chlorinated water we told, it does kill many kind of bacteria, leading to overgrowth of more aggressive ones. As a result, it decreases the diversity of microbiome. So consuming any kind of alcohol does decrease the diversity of microbiome, even in disconnection from yeast. So that is something to think about, that is something to exclude. Now, how do we feed our enemies? There are plenty kind of bacteria of bad kind which can multiply in our intestine or not, depending on do we feed them well or not. If we think about what we should remove from our food or seriously limit and avoid, number one is sugar. Sugar is terribly bad. It is, first of all, it is not normal food ingredient. It didn't, just several hundred years ago, refined sugar didn't exist in the cuisine. Even 100 years ago, it didn't exist in that quantity in which it exists now. Especially if you are in America, they add food, add sugar to every food, including bread, including fish, everywhere. And sugar companies are subsidized by Congress. It's huge business. But that business then leads to another business of buying medications. Yeah, so sugar should be avoided. I would suggest even to avoid, not just limit. And natural alternatives of sugar, something like honey or agave syrup, etc., are pretty much the same. Like it does not change anything because it is less concentrated, but the idea is the same. Normally, how God created originally, like sugar is consumed by people only with big amount of fiber. How like nature, imagine you live 1,000 years ago, how do you consume sugar? You don't eat honey every day unless you are king who can invest into it, because there's no enough honey, not that big quantity, especially because those time honeybees were not fed with corn syrup, they were literally gathering it from flowers, so honey was not as sweet as it's nowadays, and it's very limited quantity. So the only way how people would consume sugar originally would be fruits. And fruits contain sugar with lots of fiber. Yeah, you can take that sugar cane, a piece of sugar cane. Did you chew sugar cane? It's lots of fiber and not so much of sugar. So lots of fiber, that is normal thing. So if you have cravings for something sweet, start replacing candies, cookies, sugar, like all those directly sweet things, refined things, with fruits and dried fruits. Believe me, dried fruits will bring much more variety to your table, much more variety of taste. And you will consume smaller amounts of sugar with bigger amount of fiber. That's how it is supposed to work. And another thing with what should be limited, probably not completely excluded, but when I was fighting my rheumatoid arthritis, for several months or even for a couple of years, I included it 100% starch. Then later, after a long time, I started to gradually reintroduce it. But at least a couple of years, or even probably more, I didn't eat bread, grain, pasta, oats, no such thing, nothing which contains starch. Then I started to reintroduce it. Okay, you can experiment how it works for you. Can you really exclude it completely? It is possible to exclude it completely. If just limiting works well, you can limit well. We discussed about different types of starch, and still starch is an okay type of food, but during the process of very direct fighting against your autoimmune disease, you may want to limit it seriously or even avoid it for some period of time in order to restructure your microbiome. Because many pathological kinds of bacteria inside the intestine can feed on starch, including yeast or fungus of different kinds. They can feed off starch. You can remove their food in order to replace them, because that's what you want to do. And consuming vegetables in a raw condition is much better than consuming them cooked, because when they're cooked, again, they feed bacteria in slightly different way. Yes, please?
You know who Pauline is here?
Sorry?
You know who Pauline is here? She sings in the...
Okay.
She's been on a raw food diet for years and healthy as a 20-year-old.
Yeah. So raw vegetables feed you and feed the bacteria inside the intestine in much very different way from how cooked vegetables. Why? Because of enzymes. Enzymes are proteins or ferments. They're proteins which acts on accelerating certain chemical reactions. So, like, all animals and plants have enzymes. When you cook, you of course destroy them. When you don't cook, the enzymes are still active, and that's why the matter of the food is very different, and it works very different for the bacteria and your body also. On another side, in order to change, because we now talk about how to change pathological microbiome inside the intestine. In order to change it, often you need to suppress the enemies, or you need to suppress the activity of bacteria in the first part of your intestine. Especially true with small intestine bacterial overgrowth, but that has happened with other factors also. So using many herbs can be the key to it. And there are many antimicrobial herbs, and you have it again in your handout. One of the most active ones and safe ones are oregano, peppermint, cilantro, cloves. So different kinds of spices, as you see, they do suppress bacterial overgrowth. And including this into your food, by the way, allicin, which is a component in garlic and onion, also family of onion-like plants, also works very well. Berberine, which is in berberries, these are small berries, and dried and ground. Its name is sumach. It's used in Middle Eastern food. So berberine, it's another very good ingredient. So a combination of different spices and herbs and adding it to your food will allow to control bacterial overgrowth, and actually allow in this way of changing your intestinal microbiome. In your handout, you have some hints and lists which you can refer to. Be very careful. There are two which also work, which are very powerful: podarco, which is bow tree in Portuguese, podarco, and wormwood, or Artemisia, that's the scientific name of it. But I would not advise you to take it without indication of doctor and observation of doctor, because those two may have bad side effects. It's very easy to overdose, etc. So they are very strong. So probably you can have it in your memory. If needed, consult with your doctor, of course. And besides it, so we talked about the changing of food, we talked about suppressive pathological flora, and besides that, you need to actually work on repopulating actively. You heard about the terminology of probiotics, yes? And probiotics are food which contain some amount of bacteria. So this thing did exist for thousands of years. People eating food which contain living bacteria of certain kind in big quantity. Do you remember we talked that we have inertia of microbiome, both healthy and unhealthy microbiome has inertia. It is xenophobic, it does not welcome intruders, but you can still change even a xenophobic city if you bring big armies of strangers and you bring them consistently, like every day, again, you repeat, then you gradually will change it. 1-2 times will not change. Small quantities will not change. So it should come in big volumes, in big quantities, and a long time. Then you can change it. So change of microbiome in such a way was so efficient in studies. They started to study interesting way of transplantation. You know how we transplant organ, like kidney failure, transplanting new kidney, heart failure, transplanting new heart. Yes? There is an interesting type of transplantation when they transplant. It's named fecal transplants. So what they do really, they take from inside the colon of one person, healthy, and introduce a mass into the colon of sick person. And there are very good results of that, because they really transplant lots of bacteria in this way. So that's what they transplant. Actually, it is transplantation of microbiome, but the microbiome is one more organ, so yeah, you can take it and transplant it. They actually do it with cattle a lot. They have even certain surgery on cattle to make an easy access to the stomach of cattle, like a door. You can open access to the stomach of cattle, and they can take from stomach of one cattle and introduce to stomach of another. They do it in studies. Sometimes I believe they do it in industry also. But with people, they do the fecal transplant, this kind of surgery, which is very interesting surgery. But, well, you don't... this is a surgical way for it, but there is a way through lifestyle change, and the lifestyle change, consuming probiotics as your food. And of course you can buy pills. With pills there is a problem. First, the bacteria in the pills, you can imagine, they're dried and they're stored there for months or a long time. They're not very active, they're not very don't have enough vitality, and also small quantity and small volume. Remember about stomach acid, it kind of neutralizes, kills everything. Yes, something passes, but the efficiency, there is some efficiency, but very, very low efficiency. So you need to use it for a long time. It's still something to use. But there is a different way of consuming those bacteria, probiotics in big volumes and big quantities and regularly in your food. It's through consuming fermented food. Pickles, something which people used to do for millennia. And I don't speak about supermarket pickles, because supermarket pickles are not really fermented food. In order to make it cheap and to store it for a long time, they just take vegetables, pour vinegar on it, add salt, add some flavors probably, and sell it this way. So it may taste well, almost like pickles, but it's not really fermented food. It doesn't have those bacteria. I need about the countryside old style made, which stinks like sauerkraut or cucumbers or other kinds. It is not included in the handout which you see, but you can email me if you want, and one of additions, appendixes to my book is actually recipes of different kinds of fermented food. I can share that chapter with you, the collection of recipes. So naturally fermented food, old style, and almost all vegetables. I have recipes of from daikon to cucumber, from sauerkraut to ginger. All kinds of them can be made. Kimchi, which is Korean traditional. Yeah, not supermarket, and again, I should tell that not Indian-style pickles, because Indian-style pickles, they contain oil and lots of spices usually, and again, because of Indian climate probably, they were making it to store it better, but there is no much bacteria in it, so Indian pickles do not work nearly as well as European and Middle Eastern pickles. Those work better. So, just because Indian pickles are usually very spicy and are in oil, which kills or inactivates almost all bacteria. So probiotics of this kind, they work, by the way, natto, that's another Japanese or Korean thing, and kimchi, which I mentioned. Yes, so those fermented foods, they work because they come in big volume and big quantity, so the stomach juice does not kill it 100%. It usually doesn't act 100%. If it acts like 90-something%. So some amount still passes. And if you repeat it day after day, day after day, with all other things which we were telling about, yes, about excluding certain kinds of food, changing lifestyle, etc., it does gradually change your xenophobicity of that microbiome, because it's kind of continuous flow of immigrants into the country. The country will change, of course. Besides fermented vegetables, another group of fermented food which can help is dairy, fermented dairy products. Again, most of dairy products in the supermarket will not work nearly as well. Fermented, again, I can share recipes if you email me. You can join through keys2autoimmune.com, and there is email anar@keys2autoimmune.com. You can email me. I can share the chapter about collection of recipes. But I speak about the plain, what is called here in America plain yogurt or Turkish yogurt or Greek yogurt, which is pretty much the same thing. It is lactobacillus and bifidobacteria fermented milk. Then cottage cheese, which is made in a very similar way, in very old style way, because all cheeses are very different, and not all of them actually are beneficial. Some of them can be even harmful, but some kind of cheeses can be very beneficial, depending again of what kind of bacteria, what kind of bacterial cultures were used for fermentation. So some dairy products work in this way, and developing good microbial community requires many different factors. Another factor, interestingly, is fasting. We just talked with brother about fasting. It was found that during fasting there is at least one category of bacteria, Akkermansia. Akkermansia is a very important participant in our microbiome. It does increase. So others do not, fasting actually, you leave them without food. So other bacteria cannot multiply well, but Akkermansia can increase. So fasting can help to restructure your microbiome in some way. And it was found to be beneficial for diversity of microbiome. Besides fasting, prebiotics, that's another thing. We talked about probiotics, which are actually bacteria which you bring inside you, but prebiotics is a food which you give to those bacteria to strive, survive, and multiply. And those prebiotics, you already know the biggest group of them, because previous meeting we talked about fiber, right? Fiber, a different kind of fiber, soluble, non-soluble, like tough fiber and pectins, yes? These are all prebiotics. They are necessary for growth of beneficial bacteria. Inulin is another kind, which is also in vegetables. In inulin, you can find it in onions, in leeks, all that kind of onion family, and in dandelion, in chicory, and artichokes. Inulin is also carbohydrate, and it's also known to be good prebiotics, meaning feeding beneficiary bacteria. And another part which we shouldn't forget about food is consuming polyphenol-rich food. Polyphenols are a group of chemicals which are important for our body, and even more it's important for certain kinds of bacteria. And polyphenol-rich are usually fruits which are very rich in color. They're kind of red, orange, etc. Those colors are certain pigments which are usually polyphenols, some vegetables also, but the most contents probably is in berries. Berries of almost all kinds are polyphenol-rich food, which you can consume. And also environment. First of all, it was noticed that people living in certain climates are more prone to autoimmune diseases. And mostly it is climates which is either cold and humid, or very hot or warm and humid, so humidity. And it was connected to fungal growth, because dark and humid climate, and it's always warm inside your body, is very good for multiplying and growth of fungus. And the more funguses are around you, the spores of fungus is extremely small. It's like dust, or even smaller than average piece of dust, and it flies in air. You inhale and you will swallow it. The more funguses are around you, the more will attack of those funguses on your microbiome, and it may actually lead to fungal overgrowth inside the intestine, especially if the stomach acid is not strong enough. So living in a climate which is friendly for fungus growth is a factor of risk. Sometimes it is even suggested for people with autoimmune diseases or allergies to change the climate, to move to a different place, to live without fungus. That's one thing. But on another thing, we in our life often live most of the time inside houses, inside our rooms, and eating inside our rooms, but bacterial compositions, the environment inside our houses does not have enough diversity of bacteria. There was an interesting study made in Finland just several years ago. Finland is one of leaders in the world by a number of allergies, lots of allergies. So they made some kindergartens where they kept children almost all time outdoors. They were making like a garden at the kindergarten. They made an actual garden with trees and soil and dirt, and children were even eating in those gardens. So they were playing there and eating there. They were all in dirt, and the amount of allergies in those kindergartens plummeted. So staying outdoors and eating outdoors does help you to inhale and swallow more of different diversity of bacteria, which helps to form healthier microbiome. Again, do you remember that hunter-gatherers? You are looking completely different environment. They don't spend all time in offices or houses. They don't eat inside. They eat in forests. It's a much healthier microbiome. So that is probably what I wanted to share with you today. Over the last several meetings, we covered several factors. Yes, we covered today dysbacteriosis. We covered the inflammation inside intestine localized. We covered leaky gut and health of epithelium, or actually leaky gut is unhealthy epithelium. And we covered lazy gut, not good motility of intestine. Those four factors can be addressed, and they should be addressed in parallel. And if they address in parallel, you can gradually change health of intestine, health of microbiome, and health of immune system. An immune system is autoimmune diseases, allergies, and risk of oncology, all kinds of cancers. So I hope it was beneficial, and we can close with prayer probably. Yes? God Almighty, we thank you for everything what you do for us. We thank you for principles of health which you put in the environment and the nature around us, many principles which you show in your word, many principles which you teach us as we study medicine. We pray that you will help your people to be the healthiest people in this world, so that we can bring testimony of truth to people, showing it in all dimensions, including health. How it was with Israel in Egypt, when they were witnessing that even Israeli women are much stronger and healthier than Egyptians, how it was in many cases in history. So let it be now in these last times when the majority of people, they don't know your word, unfortunately, so that we can in practice show it to them. Give your spirit to your people and lead in your ways. We commit into your hands and pray that we can bring testimony for the praise, glory of your name. Glory be to you. Amen. Amen.
Thank you so much, man. That is...
Thank you, brothers.
So much to process and think, and things that I need to...